Ladies and gentlemen, welcome again. My name is Valerie and I'm from the Office of Alumni Relations. Thank you for being a part of You Alive today. The program today is in 3 sections: a 10-minute talk by our speaker, Professor John Wong, a 10-minute interview with our You Alive moderator, Mr. Viswasada Sivan, and then a 40-minute Q&A session open to the live and online audience. If you wish to ask a question, please make your way to the microphones placed along the aisles and speak directly into them. This is so the online community is able to hear your question. Thank you for your kind attention, and please sit back and enjoy the show. Thank you.
You Alive.
I remember when I first presented that data in Boston, someone in the audience got up and called me a racist. And I said, no, I'm not a racist. I'm just trying to point out that nature has done an experiment. What we need to do is to be smart enough to understand that experiment. One of the best examples which we contributed to over the last 10 years is lung cancer. So lung cancer, very common cancer. But it's been known for a long time that Asians, especially Asian women, are dying of lung cancer even without smoking. Women in the West, it's a smoking-associated disease. In Asia, it does not appear to be a smoking-related disease. So can you imagine what happens when Asian women start to smoke, as they're doing now? Lung cancer can sometimes express targets which you can attack. And the target that was expressed in a very high incidence of Orientals was a modified target compared to Caucasians. 2 companies invested a lot of money, close to $1 billion, in developing a drug to go after this target. And the bottom line was the drug hardly worked in a Caucasian population. The drug was going to be withdrawn. But the drug is spectacularly effective in an Oriental population. So that's sort of personalizing the medicine, using ethnicity as a surrogate to dive deep and find out what's the molecular basis in which you then plan your treatment.
Ladies and gentlemen, Prof. John Wong.
Well, good evening, everyone, and thanks for having me here this evening at You Live. I've been asked to talk basically over the next 10 minutes to give you a rough overview of who I am, for those of you who don't know me, and what I do. So when I was deciding on what I would like to do with my life, I thought that I'd like to do something which was useful. I thought that I would also like to try and do something which was intellectually challenging. And I wanted to try and do something which would at least give me a fair chance of employment. So these were the options that I thought I went through. I thought I'd try my hand at journalism because I love to read or write, read and write. But when I saw the deadlines required in journalism, I sort of thought twice. I thought of becoming an archaeologist because I love history, but then I was told in Singapore there's not many places to dig. I thought, well, maybe I'll try my hand at being a diplomat, but then I saw that you had to learn languages, and that part of my brain never really developed. So it was priesthood, teaching, or medicine. And I thought that, well, medicine could combine many of the above. And so that's why I applied for medical school. I am an alumnus. I graduated in the class of 1981. But after I graduated, that's when I really started thinking about what does it mean to really be a doctor? And I think the best definition comes from, this is from Mark Zeidel, who is chairman of medicine at the Harvard Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center. And I think there are probably three facets about being a doctor. I think the first, that if you do want to become a doctor, that the patient's interests have to come first. And that actually ends up with a fair amount of trade-offs, but it's trade-offs that one makes entirely on your own will. So I remember my wife and I dated for about 8 years, and I kept on telling her, "Are you sure you want to marry a doctor?" And I think that that sort of made her even more mad. So that's the first issue, that doctors do have to put their patients' interests first. The second is that doctors, because of by nature of the profession, do have to hold themselves and their peers accountable for the quality of care, for the safety of care, and for the morality of the care that they provide. And that actually is what people say, doctors are meant to be self-regulating. That's actually what self-regulation is all about. Because it's not just self-regulation in behavior, it's actually making sure that people deliver the kind of care that they can be held accountable for safely. And lastly, doctors are meant to maintain this body of knowledge and add to it. And the only way you can really add to knowledge is through research. And that's why I do feel passionately about why the medical profession must be involved in research if they are going to be true to the profession. So that's what it means to be a doctor. So I have, the university and the Ministry of Health together have me doing a few jobs. I'm involved in helping President Tan Chua Chuan. I'm helping Benjamin Ong. I'm also helping out at HSA. But my real job, and I'd like to share with you this, is, I do everything else to try and help me with my real job. And my real job is I'm a practicing oncologist. And so I deal with cancer. And it's a huge problem in Singapore. As you can see, the volume of cancer cases is not growing by a straight line. It's going up exponentially. It's like a ski slope. And I give drugs to try and help patients at least to try and stabilize cancer. I give drugs to try and buy patients time. So this is a patient of mine with advanced pancreatic cancer. I think for those people who know about pancreatic cancer, it's not a good cancer to have. But we've been able to stabilize this patient for more than 2 years. Occasionally, we get very lucky. This is a patient who presented to me with advanced breast cancer involving the liver. That was in 2005. And we stopped scanning her because it's now 7 years, and we stopped scanning in 2010 because she's back to work full-time, no symptoms. And so she's had 7 years we've been able to keep her well. And occasionally we're really lucky. And this is Joyce. I think some of my medical students have known about Joyce. Joyce saw me when she was 15. She was brought into the emergency room. This picture is given Joyce has given me permission to share her story. Joyce saw me when she was wheeled in at the age of 15, and actually as a case of cardiac arrest. Her heart had stopped. The cancer load was massive. We spent Christmas, New Year, Chinese New Year in the intensive care unit stabilizing Joyce. And I'm delighted to say that 7 years later, she danced at the National Day Parade. And she got married last year and just had her first baby girl. And so that's, something which really keeps us going. And another patient which keeps me going is Madame Rokia, the lady sitting in the middle. This picture was taken in 1992 when she was first diagnosed. And when she was first diagnosed, we had a long chat, and she said, look, I would like to see all my children married. And at that time, only one of her children, her daughter, was married. 1992, 1995, she saw one son married. 2002, she saw another son married. 2010, she saw her last daughter married. And this was a picture taken with her last week in her house. And so we go on this journey together. And this is what keeps me going. So I was asked to talk a little bit about my other job, and that's actually helping drive the research agenda. And this big question, why should Singapore do research? Why can't we just import the body of knowledge that has been generated in centers such as North America, Western Europe, Japan? Why can't we just import it? Well, I say we can import it, but what happens if the disease doesn't behave the same way? And this is something which struck me when I came back from the United States in 1992, 1993. I was trained at one of the world's best cancer centers, and when I came back, I saw something, and other people were seeing the same thing too, but I guess they weren't as vocal about it. But lung cancer in Singapore, and by the way, in Taiwan, in Hong Kong, in Japan, and in China, lung cancer looked as if it was a slightly different disease. So if you look in the West, this is in women. Lung cancer in the West is a disease of smoking. But in this part of the world, Singapore, Hong Kong, Taiwan, China, Japan, you have women coming down with lung cancer who don't smoke. At the same incidence, the incidence of lung cancer is about the same. So, to me, there's all sorts of red flags going up. So if the women in this audience do smoke, it's like, it's like adding fuel to fire. So there's something going on here, and that the question is lung cancer behaving differently here? So one of the first things that I did was to actually try and study this prospectively. Actually, this is still Asia's only academic clinical trials group based here at NUS. Australia supplied us with the Caucasian population, and later Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Korea joined us. And we were one of the first groups to show that ethnicity was a major predictor of survival in patients with lung cancer. And that was an interesting fact. But at the same time, there was a company developing a tablet, so a tablet for lung cancer treatment. And we were one of the first groups to show that there was a major difference in the response to this tablet. Patients Western patients, the Caucasian patients taking the tablet, pretty low response. Orientals taking the tablet, quite a significant response. And it looked as if the reason why people were responding differently was the presence of what we call a mutated receptor. And so this has actually changed the whole treatment of lung cancer. If you have a mutated receptor, you take a tablet. It's very convenient. Side effects, essentially a rash. If you have the normal receptor, you go for traditional chemotherapy. And it's essentially captured in this paper published by Tony Mok from Chinese University of Hong Kong. We were a contributor to this trial. But again, it showed that a common disease, lung cancer is a very common disease. For years, we've been treating it with essentially the Western way, which did not appear to be as relevant to an Oriental population as it does to a Caucasian population. So this is our current dream, which we're working on very much, is to actually try and match treatment to an individual. So once you find the genetic signature, once you find the mutation, once you find the genetic signature, then everything else is secondary. And so to line the drug up with the signature has been the way in which we're really driving treatment here at the university. So the question is, my talk was why Singapore can, should, and must. So why Singapore must? It's because we are faced with this tsunami which is coming in the next 10 years. Actually, it's upon our doorstep right now. The incidence of all these chronic diseases, cancer, dementia, stroke, diabetes, is going to hit Singapore. It's breaking on us right now. And in nearly every one of these diseases, the behavior amongst an Asian population is different from a population in the West. So we need to start developing strategies, because if we import our strategies from North America and Western Europe, they may not work, because we may be dealing with a slightly different disease. The good news, I tell people, when I first started practicing oncology about 20, 25 years ago, the survival for advanced colon cancer was about 6 months. The good news is the survival for advanced colon cancer now is in years. Madam Rokia, classic example. That's the good news. The bad news is that the treatment costs have just gone through the roof, for 1 month of treatment. And this is, in Singapore. So we need to really start trying to be much smarter about the way we go about treating cancer. So finally, again, people ask me, why I do what I do. And I thought I'd share what I have always felt was the most pertinent quotation. And this is a quotation from Rin Sandberg. Rin Sandberg is an American baseball player. And this is actually written, David Brooks, the New York Times columnist, actually wrote about Rin Sandberg's speech when he was inducted into the US Baseball Hall of Fame. And I'll just read it out to you. I was in awe every time I walked onto the field. That's respect. I was taught you never, ever disrespect your opponents or your teammates or your organization or your manager, and never, ever your uniform. You make a great play, act like you've done it before. Respect. A lot of people say this honor validates my career, but I didn't work hard for validation. I didn't play the game right because I saw a reward at the end of the tunnel. I played it right because that's what you're supposed to do. Play it right and with respect. If this validates anything, it's that the guys who taught me the game did what they were supposed to do, and I did what I was supposed to do. So this is what a university education is about. This is what role models are all about. And if I've been able to do anything, it's because I was taught well. Thank you very much. This was.
John, thanks a lot.
Good to see you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I've got a few friends who are oncologists as well, like you. And I remember a conversation I had with one of them. And of course, we had a few wines, a few glasses of wine that evening. And we started talking and getting a little emotional. And at some point, he started to tear when he started to talk about his patients, because he got emotional and he said, I don't quite understand why I put myself through this, because most of my patients don't make it. And it's very painful because much as I don't want to, I do form a relationship. It's almost like you lose a friend every few months. And that's very painful. Why? It must be very painful. I mean, we know of at least one mutual friend who was your patient, and I know that you formed a relationship. As a doctor, as an oncologist, dealing with something that is terminal. It must be extremely painful to continue doing it for how many years now?
1988.
Yeah. Maybe you could share with us what you go through as an oncologist.
Yes, yes, it's always painful losing a patient. And yes, I become very much a part of the family because I see them and the whole family going through.
And I hear that's very much your style. You're known for that. You get to know the whole family.
I think all doctors do that. Mm-hmm. I think all doctors do that. So how do I cope with it? I cope with it by, well, first saying that if I can help the patient and the family at some part of the journey, then I've contributed, and that's my contribution. So helping patients and their families try and get through very difficult periods. We try everything to try and allow them to see their children get married, see their children graduate, milestones. So that is one very strong social element. The research is critical because the research then allows us to offer potential drugs which aren't commercially available. And we've had patients on research protocols, again, live very meaningful lives for some time. So I think the research component really helps me see the light at the end of the tunnel, as well as the ability to, if anything, be a listening ear and to try and relieve the symptoms that they have. So we spend a lot of time relieving patients of symptoms, pain, breathlessness, appetite, helping them through that, just psychosocial support, listening to them. And then also having, I've got a tremendous family and great set of friends who also provide me with the social sustenance. And finally, actually, and I don't mean to sound glib, but I tell my patients, many times my patients ask me, how long do I have? And I tell them, when I first started practicing I started doing oncology in 1988. I used to be, full of bravado. I used to say, oh, you've got so many months, and invariably I was wrong. So I tell my patients, look, I don't even know what's going to happen to me tonight. I could, when I drive home, I could have a horrific, car accident. I could have a stroke, so if I can't predict what's going to happen to me tonight, I certainly can't predict what's going to happen to you. And so the best approach is we should both live life to the fullest every day. And that's actually become my philosophy, because I really can't tell what's going to happen tomorrow. And I have seen patients who I thought are going to do very well, suddenly something happens. And I've got patients who I think are going to do terribly, still send me, still coming, they're still coming to see me. And
they're still around.
They're still around, sending me, Chinese New Year, we get together, Christmas, we get together. So doctors are just as mortal and just as fallible as everybody else. So never listen to predictions.
So let me now ask you a question that may burst your bubble, your ego. How much of it do you think it's people survive, people live longer because of your intervention, and how much of it do you think it's divine intervention?
Okay, so divine intervention plays a huge role.
Since outcomes are so elastic and unpredictable,
absolutely.
Statistically you can't attribute it to you.
Oh, I certainly don't. And I think that anything that I'm able to do as I said, is because someone has taught me. And I'm still learning. I still ask my colleagues. I still ask people for advice and input. So how much do I think my patients are doing well because of me or in spite of me? I think that I think patients, if they're doing well, it's because they've got tremendous family support. There's been great research which has developed drugs. All those examples I used were drugs. I have yet to develop a drug. I see that there are one or two people in this audience who have developed drugs. I have not developed a drug at all. I'm a user. I'm a purveyor of other people's knowledge. But it's certainly, I would probably say I play an assisting role in this.
Well, you were dean of School of Medicine for how many years? 6?
Close to 9.
9 years.
Well,
a long time.
8+, yeah.
So you had a real good opportunity to influence the bedside manners of doctors. And as you're aware, there is a pervasive complaint about locally trained doctors who have absolutely no EQ, who have no ability to convey bad news. I heard of a horror story not too long ago of a Singapore-trained doctor who basically told parents that their 4-year-old child is going to die and is better off that she's dead, because she's not, and in those words, because she's not going to be leading a normal life if she does survive. So, as dean, how much of emphasis did you place as a practicing doctor way before that, and someone with obviously the right values, how much of emphasis did you place on making sure that we communicate right, which is a very important part of being a doctor?
Yes. So absolutely, Viswas, I fully agree with you that, but just like I probably have very little direct credit if my patients live long. Unfortunately, the power of the dean to actually affect outcome during their lifetime is also very limited.
Now you're beginning to sound like a politician.
Oh, it's actually the truth. There's some students here in the audience. They probably know that. So I fully agree with you, and I've made it. I've shared with people that the number one cause of medical complaints and medical litigation stems from bad communication. So bad communication is probably the number one nemesis, I think, of the profession. But understanding what the problem is and trying to actually fix it is a huge challenge. So I don't know, that doctor who you described, what the circumstances were involved. But let me just take one step back and say maybe the medical profession is just another example, actually, of our society and our educational system. You see, in the past, and still very much in the present, I think, what defines whether someone goes from primary 6 to the best secondary school?
PSLE.
PSLE.
One exam.
And does the PSLE contain one exam called communication? It's math, science, mother tongue.
Yep.
So, and then to go from secondary school to the best junior college, so all the milestones, fortunately or unfortunately, all the milestones are characterized by knowledge. And the medical school was just as guilty of this, because it's much easier to grade knowledge. But we've been trying very hard over the last 9 years to say, look, knowledge is only just part of it, because you can be the smartest person in town, but we've seen really smart people end up with doing terrible things. So knowledge is just one element. And so we've said that we should move from just knowledge alone to competency. And competency includes communication. It includes being able to work as a team. It includes being able to constantly learn on your own because medical knowledge will continue forever. It includes knowing how to apply knowledge. I mean, knowing something is one thing, but knowing how to apply it is another. So we've really moved towards competencies. The big challenge is how do you then assess competencies objectively? You know, there's
how are medical students trained in this area?
So again, big push to try and get this. So one of our challenges, because we are still a state school, you know, when you've got 300 students every year, trying to provide them with the best education possible does require substantial resources, both monetary, infrastructure, as well as role models. So you need the whole, gamut.
Yeah.
So we try and provide them with, we're trying our level best to try and keep role models as teachers. Big challenge. We then try and introduce them very early on. In first year medicine, we try and start exposing them to patients. And we try and expose them now to what we call standardized patients. It was featured in the papers, but under the Duke program. So what's happening in Duke is happening at NUS, where there are standardized patients in which we try and we have actors who are trained to give feedback. We have a whole simulated hospital built. So we have simulated operating rooms, simulated intensive care units, simulated childbirth, you name it. So the simulators can be very realistic, and the students are filmed. And they're filmed how they're dealing, and then they basically go through the debrief, and you can do this multiple times. But I think it's really important that everyone understands that medical education does not stop as soon as they graduate.
Yep.
It's only the beginning. In fact, I can share with you that I'm still, when I have to go and break bad news, actually I quickly do my own 2-minute review on how to do it again.
In spite of having done it so many times?
Because I still can't do it well. I mean, these things are just things which take, so that doctor who you just described, I'm not sure under what circumstance, because there are some things which just come with experience and time. When you're a young doctor and you're faced with something horrific, sometimes it's difficult to be able to tell someone something horrific when you just don't have that experience. That's one aspect. And then the other aspect which people don't realize is that there are only 24 hours in a day. And I say this because when you've got 10 or 15 very sick patients and you've got a fixed amount of time, what happened, I'll just share with you, in 1981, when I graduated, if you had a heart attack and you came to, I was a intern at Singapore General Hospital. If you came in with a heart attack, there were only 3 things that we did. We put you in bed, we gave what we call glycerine tablets, and we gave morphine. We gave oxygen. Okay, that's not a drug. We gave 4 things: oxygen, glycerine, morphine, and put you in bed. And then we just hope for the best. Okay, 1981, fast forward to 2012. You come in with a heart attack. Wow, the number of decisions that the poor doctor has to make, the number of drugs that they have to offer, the number of decisions, the tests that they have to make has gone up 10, 15-fold.
Yeah.
But there's still only 24 hours in that day. So they have to do so much more in a shorter period of time, and people now expect to survive a heart attack. Those days, you thought, you praised God if you survived a heart attack. Now you expect to survive a heart attack. So the poor junior doctors are faced with this intense change in practice and still having to have the time to sit down and communicate and do all the things that we tell them to do. It's very difficult, even for senior, experienced doctors. So again, expectations, and again, to add complexity, now you've got ER, you've got house, you've got, I've worked in an American emergency room. And I've only watched one episode of ER, and I told
That's not real, is it?
well, it's like, okay, no one ever looks that good, and you know, nothing is ever cut and dry. But the audience watches that, and they come in and they expect
With
that.
expectations. Yeah.
So the expectations are tremendous. People expect, you know, Singapore is a first world country. People expect first world outcomes, but we don't pay first world income tax, and you know, so this whole issue of resources, expectations, the tremendous pressure put on the profession. These are not excuses. The profession has to tackle this because it's the #1 cause of litigation and complaints.
Yep.
But it's a big challenge, and you know, even now, I can share with you that I still find it challenging. So how do I deal with it? So I deal with it by letting my clinic run. Okay, so I run. So Tuesdays and Thursdays, I start my clinic at lunchtime, and I just let it run. And I've let it run to as late as 1 o'clock in the morning, because I find it very hard to, you know, if a patient needs time to talk, I will talk. But I do have to tell them, look, there are other patients waiting outside. But you know, sometimes patients say, no, you know, I'm the most important person right now, not the person sitting outside. And well, unfortunately, the time my clinic ran to 1 o'clock in the morning, the second last patient happened to be Prof. Tan Cho Chuan's mother. She said, wow, this is the first time I've had to change out of my pajamas to come and see you. You know? But I mean, I get, you know, my nurses, I send them home by taxi, but you know, the fact that I run the clinic, this is not an example. You know, I'm sure I'm the greatest example of inefficiency of a healthcare system. You cannot have doctors overshooting their clinic by 6 hours. You know, so it's a challenge that we face.
Okay. Questions, comments? But first of all, before that, can I see a show of hands of those who were students when he was dean? You don't have to be embarrassed. No, only one? I thought you said there were few. The rest of them want to remain anonymous? Okay. How many of you are doctors here? How many doctors? Menkin, you can put your hand up too. Only 2? Okay, good. So we can have questions that we will understand. Good. Can we have the first question or comment, please? Yes. Could you use the microphone, if you don't mind? Thank you. Identify yourself, your IC number.
Okay. I hope I'm not in a dream because Army was quite experienced. But before I start my question, I'd just like to say, Prof. Wong, I found that your presentation, just that short presentation, was very interesting, and I really enjoyed it.
Oh, thank you.
My name is Ernest. I'm a third-year medical student studying in London currently. And I've got 2 questions, if that's okay.
Sure.
My first question would be, you emphasize quite a bit on research, and I'm sure that the audience will know that Singapore soon will become the medical hub of Southeast Asia. And that would include a lot of like clinical experience and things to do with research as well. So say as medical students, what do you think we can do to help Singapore move towards this medical hub? And what can we do, especially in terms of research, because we understand now that Singapore is not a prime location, it's not well known around the world for producing extremely good research compared to the US or the UK. That's my first question. My second question would be, just to the general audience, do you think that cancer now is still considered a disease that has a really, really bad prognosis? And what do you think the future of cancer research would be probably 20 years or 10 years down the line?
Yep. Thank you.
So Ernest, that last question, the future of cancer research, do you want me, is that to me or to the audience?
To you.
To me? Okay. So
On behalf of the audience.
Okay, on behalf of the audience, okay. Let me try and deconstruct this, and please correct me if I got the points wrong. But so the first question is, what can medical students learn or do in terms of research? Is it okay? So I know of two. I know there've been two medical students who have changed history. So one medical student, and okay, both these medical students were at Harvard. Okay, so now I worked at Cornell University for 8 years. And I can say that the Singaporean medical student is just as good as the Cornell medical student. And Cornell medical students, many of the Cornell residents come from Harvard, so I extrapolate and say, I had Cornell medical students, I had Harvard students who came as residents. So I've got a rough feel for the quality of students at Harvard and at Cornell. And I can say that the students, Singaporean medical students, whether they're in Singapore or in the UK, I am confident are just as good as students at Harvard. But there's a difference. The Harvard student and the Cornell student is fearless in terms of wanting to learn. Okay, so they are not shy, they're not embarrassed. They will do, I mean, for them, they are like a sponge. And anything that they don't know, they will ask. And that's one major difference. Okay, so Singaporean students are just as smart, but somehow I think I find students here in a way defining themselves as a student. I'm a student, so therefore I'm the lowest of the totem pole. While the American student says, I'm a student and I should know everything. So the mindset is different. So the two medical students that I know who changed medical history, okay, there's something called vitamin B12. So vitamin B12 is a critical vitamin, and vitamin B12 is absorbed in the body by something called intrinsic factor. Mm-hmm. The person who discovered intrinsic factor was a third-year medical student in Harvard.
Wow.
Okay, and he discovered it because he failed third year, and because he failed third year, he had to repeat third year. He knew the subject matter, so he went to the lab. And he ended up discovering intrinsic factor, third-year medical student. There's another medical student who basically discovered why you bleed when your platelet count drops. So, I think everyone knows dengue. So dengue, your platelet count drops, you bleed. But I can tell you there are people walking around with 0 platelet counts who don't bleed. There's a condition whereby they have very little platelets. So there's always been a medical mystery. Why is it that there's some people walking around with 0 platelets who don't bleed, and yet if you suddenly drop your platelet count, so it has something to do with the rate at which your platelet counts drop. And the person who discovered the mechanism behind it was a medical student. So medical students can do fantastic things. So my advice to all students is that when your time in medical school is the last time in your life when your only responsibility is to learn. Once you graduate, you are faced with the terrible triples. You have to work, you have to raise a family, and you have to continue studying. So as a medical student, that's your last time in which you've got no other responsibility except to learn. And that's what, when you learn, you should ask yourself these questions like, Michael Gimbroni, the person who discovered why you bleed when your platelet count drops. So when you study, something must interest you. And when something interests you, that's when you should really, start trying to formulate the question. So one key factor which I think will differentiate a great doctor from the rest of the pack is that the great doctor always asks why. I mean, I've told this story many times when I was a medical student, and Prof. Tok is so Professor Tok was the dean of the medical school, 3 deans before me, and Prof. When I was a medical student, we were taught that stomach ulcers were caused by acid. It was drilled into our head. We had to know every way of shutting off acid to pass the exams. We now know that stomach ulcers are caused by a bacteria.
Yeah.
It's a complete reversal of information. That discovery came from Perth. All of us have gone, so the Nobel Prize for medicine went down to Perth, and so it brings me to that second point you asked me. You said that Singapore is not famous in terms of research like the United States or Western Europe. I am very heartened by the fact that we have a group of Singaporeans now. They are in their early 40s who are now reaching world fame. I say this because we were just reviewed by one of our biggest programs in the medical school is our cancer program. And our cancer program has a blue ribbon international panel that comes to review it because it's one of our big assets. And this blue ribbon panel does not say things lightly. And the head of the blue ribbon panel took me aside and said, John, you better protect these 3 people. And these were all associate professors, all locals. 3 of them local NUS graduates, basically did all their training here. He said, you better watch these 3, because if you don't look after these 3, I want to recruit them. So we do have now homegrown talent. They aren't, superstars, but 2 of them were quoted in the journal. So the Journal of so the first person is the Dean of the Medical School now. The current Dean of the Medical School, Yeo Kei Guan, was featured in the Journal of Gastroenterology and Hepatology when they wrote about 10 gastroenterologists who are going to change gastroenterology. And of the 10, one of them is Yeo Kei Guan. That was in the editorial. And the other one, there's an award given for the most promising researchers in a cancer called myeloma. And one of them is Cheng Wei-ju, who won the NUS Young Scientist Award last year. So we've got some really spectacular faculty, homegrown. Well, Wei-ju went to medical school in the UK, but came back here, and his career took off here. So we have got great talent here.
So John, let me ask you a question here, picking up from what Ernest highlighted. How did we come to this point? I would say just 5 years ago, we were nowhere. We were not really there. I think from what I've sensed, in the last 5 years or so, there's been significant shifts and movements and progress made in research. And of course, there have been some controversies as well in terms of the amount of money that's pumped into research. For example, the debate between Philip Yeo and Lee Wei Ling. We shan't go there, but the point is there have been a lot of controversies. A-STAR, National Research Foundation, as well as NUHS. And I gather to some extent that you've been quite instrumental in trying to push the research agenda within NUHS. Don't be modest, so you don't have to respond to that. But if you could share with us, very briefly, the journey to where we are today. We're obviously in a cusp of sorts.
Well, I think that we have, so what has happened in the last, actually, the decision was made in 2000. We managed to persuade the government in 2000 to invest in biomedical research. So firstly, we have had investments. We've had investments both in developing our own, as well as bringing in the best of international talent to come and mentor our own. So, not everyone has the opportunity to go and work for 10 or 15 years at the best institutions overseas. So can we bring some of the best overseas to come here and mentor and work alongside our own who are extremely talented? So that's probably been, we've really tried to tell people, firstly, we must solve our own problems. That whole lung cancer story, why should an American taxpayer pay to develop a drug which doesn't really work in their patient population? So and the same goes for dementia, the same goes for stroke, the same goes for obesity, the same goes for many key drugs. There are differences between different populations. So it's, I think it would be naive of us to think, especially in a time of austerity, that other countries will fund work which is not relevant to their patient populations. Now, 20 years ago, let's say 30, 40 years ago in Singapore, people were dying of infection. Life expectancy in Singapore 40 years ago was about 60, 65. Now people are living longer, we're more educated, our expectations are higher. Yes, now, Ernest was asking about cancer. People come down with cancer, they expect treatment for it. 30 years ago, you come down with cancer, you just got morphine and, So the fact that we've got the government now to start investing in developing solutions for our problems has been a big step forward. The fact that we've got such great youth who can be nurtured into leaders of tomorrow, the fact that we've been able to attract very talented people to come to Singapore to work alongside and develop this whole ecosystem, that's all paying off now. You talked about why is research so expensive. To move a drug from a test tube into a human being is extremely difficult. You know, to do an experiment on plastic or in a glass test tube is relatively simple. Well, simple in the sense that if something goes wrong, you know, you can also repeat the experiment. But you can't do that in a human being. By the time you put something into a human being, you must be pretty confident that what's going to happen. And before it goes from test tube to human being, it goes through animal models. And all of that is time, cost, expense. That drug I showed you in lung cancer, the target for that drug was identified in 1962. The guy who identified that target, Stanley Cohen, won the Nobel Prize. But the target was identified in 1962. The drug wasn't developed until 2002. And the proof that it actually works in an abnormal receptor was only in 2004. And the fact that it's better in Asians, you know, in different patient populations was in 2009. So, you know, that over that 40-year period, that's why it's so expensive. So people say that, you know, we should not be investing in basic research. It's just too expensive. I say that we have to, because you just don't know where that knowledge is going to go. And unless you invest in it now, there is no way that we can end up with the quality of life that we have right now. And it's not just in medical science. I'm told that GPS, when GPS was first developed, no one had any idea that it'd be doing what it's doing currently, or even the internet. So all of these applications came much, much later. Now, if we only want to do research towards the end, we will be followers and not leaders. And if we are followers, what's going to happen? Our best and brightest sitting in this room, why should they spend their best years of their life in a place which is just going to be a follower? You know, our students can go anywhere in the world, and any country would grab them. So unless we create an environment here which can nurture and ultimately roost our best and brightest, why should people stay here? You know, I'm really delighted. There's a top Singaporean who's at Cambridge. In fact, I didn't even know that he was there. Because we're doing well now in research, he's a heart specialist. He's a cardiologist at Cambridge, very senior. He's coming back. He's coming back to Singapore. And, I've told Cambridge, you're not losing him. He's going to be your ambassador. So this way, Cambridge will know everything that's happening here, and we'll know everything happening in Cambridge. But the fact that we can attract Singaporeans back to NUS and to Singapore, you know, I think it has been, that payoff is immeasurable.
So Terence, you heard that.
Ernest.
So you better come back. Yeah, can we have the next comment, please? Or question?
Hello. Hi.
Yeah, it's working
Hi,
now.
everyone. My name is Valerie, and I'm the online moderator for tonight's event. So we've got a question and a mini conversation going on in the comments on a non-technical issue. I think you had shared with us, Prof. Wong, that when you graduated in 1981, you weren't the top of your class. So I think someone picked up on that and asked that if you'd like to share if you faced any discrimination when you were being not at the top when you first starting out in the medical profession. Yeah, could you share your experiences?
Okay.
For not being top of class?
Yeah, I mean, starting out not at the top. So how did that
Is that
like,
so
affect
important?
your life? Yeah.
So this is a medical student?
Didn't say.
Sounds like. Okay.
Probably a student.
So, I mean, it was, I put it there because I think that at the end of the day, I have yet to have a patient ask me, what were my grades in medical school? Patients want to know, you know, are you a good doctor? Can you perform? Now, the people who were top in my class were able to do both. Okay, so the people who were, the people on top of my class not only were academically brilliant, but they were great doctors. So I was above average academically, and I've tried to compensate by developing, skills. So I think at the end of the day, it's actually going back to what is a good doctor all about. And so that's one reason why I feel that I have to keep learning, because I can't, in good faith, sit in front of my patient and tell them that this is the best treatment possible unless I keep up. And boy, is it difficult to keep up in my field. So I have to make a conscious effort, because otherwise I just can't in good faith sit and talk to my patient and say this is the best thing for you. So I try and compensate for my deficiencies, put it that way. But you can, whoever asked that question, you can reply back to them that at least in my profession, I've yet to have a patient ask me what I got in medical school. Or for that matter, what I got for my specialist exams. They just want to know, am I a bona fide doctor, and have I not, am I still on the Singapore Medical, I haven't been struck off the Singapore Medical Council.
Are you Patch Adams?
Am I Patch Adams? To be honest, I never watched the movie, so...
You should. Earlier on, John, you mentioned, when we were just chatting, you mentioned that some of the best students that you've met during your time as a medical student were Malaysian students. And they were a class above Singapore students. What is it about them that was so different? I mean, at that point in time.
Yeah. So I entered medical school in 1976. And the Malaysian students were fantastic all-rounders. They studied hard, they played hard, they played multiple sports, hockey, rugby, soccer. Many of them took part in very in plays which would have rated an R21. So they were very talented culturally, musically.
We use the word colorful.
Yes, they were colorful. They had very strong personalities. Well, I think over time, definitely I see Singapore. I mean, certainly the Singaporean students in the NUS Yong Lu Lin School now are extremely talented in all those areas. But one challenge we have in Singapore, and again, this is just because we're a small country, is because most of our top students tend to go to the same schools, is that a certain groupthink does creep in.
Yeah.
And I guess Malaysia being a much bigger country, it's, top schools in Penang have a different flavor from the top schools in KL. And we could see that. Someone from Penang Free, probably had a different flavor from someone from Bukit Bintang Girls High School. So that's something which is something we just accept in Singapore. But I think what we need to do, we really need to get our students to spend time overseas. So I was fortunate. I did a big chunk of my postgraduate training, in the United States, and that gave me a different perspective. And I think it's very important to spend time in different cultures, working in different cultures, because you will get different perspectives.
Not just in medicine. You're talking about students in general.
Everything. Because life is never, the situation now is so different than it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And as we move forward, the situation in Singapore is going to be very different in 5 years' time. And unless we have people who are adaptable, flexible, bounce back, can seize opportunities, we're going to be, no one owes us a living.
Yeah. We have time for one final question or comment. Yes, please.
Hi, good evening, Prof. Wong. Just like to find out,
Your name?
Oh, yeah. My name is Saoyang. I'm a second-year medical student. Yeah, so I just want to find out what made you move from becoming a clinician to become a clinician administrator, like taking up, like becoming the dean and then becoming vice provost. What were the pull and push factors involved?
Oh, that's a painful question.
You've just put a stake through my heart. You've just called me that's why I keep on saying I still define myself ultimately. I still define myself ultimately as a person who sees patients. That's how I define myself. I see everything else as something I've had to do to try and create an environment so that I can, do what I enjoy doing most. I think that everyone in this room, and there's going to be a time in your life in which you do have to stand up and contribute. I did not want to become dean, but when asked, I felt that I had to, I can't sit and complain about everything without trying to go ahead and help. So I think when the time comes when people hear, when everyone is asked, can you help? I think all of us need to help, because if we don't help, then who will? So I do not see myself staying in my current vice provost role and everything else as a career. I'm doing this because, well, someone's asked me to help for a defined period of time. I will help, but at the end of the day, the things I enjoy most of all, I enjoy, number one, talking. We've got really great science faculty. I see Professor Naoki Yamamoto here. So Professor Yamamoto is one of the smartest people in viruses. And Professor Yamamoto is, whenever I have a conversation with him, I learn things which I never knew about viruses before. So, reading the journals, going to meetings and hearing what's happening, seeing my patients, because seeing patients for me makes the reality that this is not an abstract population, an abstract, question. Seeing patients tells me this is a very real problem at hand. But how do we go about trying to come up with better treatments for our patient, better ways to screen, diagnose, manage patients? And that's where the research and reading and going to meetings about. The rest is extracurricular activity, which is national. Well, it's professional service. I do this for the profession because they ask me to do it. But so at some point in your life, someone will come to you and ask you to help out, and I hope you can help in some way.
Thank you for the response. May I just add one more question?
Sure.
Prof. Wong, previously you mentioned that she went through 2 residencies for oncology training.
I'm sorry?
2 residencies, like you finished one locally, then after you went overseas.
Yeah.
So for local students studying here, would you still recommend the same plan, or would you say that we should just do it locally already?
So what do I recommend that everyone do 2 residencies?
No, like let's say we compare a bond here, should we go overseas for second training, or?
It's really up to you.
You don't need permission.
Yeah, you should do what you think. I wanted to go for further training because I just felt inadequate still.
So does the local system, is the local system good
Local
enough?
system has greatly improved. This in 1981, I'll just share with you. In 1981, when I started working, we used to reuse needles. I had to buy my own needles because I just couldn't subject my poor patients, because we were a poor country in 1981. And drawing blood, every day the needles would be sent back for sharpening. You could hear the buzz because the needles would be sharpened and sterilized. And we used to draw blood with needles, which were really blunt. And so I went and bought my own needles. Okay, so that was Singapore in 1981. You probably go to Zouk. Where Zouk was, you could smell where Zouk was, miles before you even got there. Singapore was a very different place. So the quality of training now is much, much better than it was, 25 years ago. So, I can tell you that right now, we've got young doctors in my department who have gone through NUS Medical School, did all their training here, and they're superb. So I think you can get superb training here. Whether you want to go for further training, that's your entire call. If you feel that you need it, go for it. If you feel that you're well trained, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. 2 quick last questions. Okay. 1, oh, you have. Should I let you? I didn't say yes. Are you another medical student? No. Good, then you can.
Good evening, Prof. Wan. So actually, I'm an engineering student from the engineering faculty of NCIS, and I just have a short question. So it's like, as a doctor, right, do you support euthanasia, and what do you think of it? That's all I think.
Whoa, just when we are running out of time. Okay.
Okay, so euthanasia is essentially patient-assisted suicide, and so again, that is contrary to the medical ethics. So patient-assisted suicide, no, that's not something that I support. Do I support doing everything to make sure that the patient is comfortable and making sure that the patient doesn't suffer and is managed to have a dignified, good death? Yes, I do everything possible to try and make sure that that's possible. So, the whole issue of euthanasia has been colored, but the actual strict issue of patient-assisted suicide, just like any form of suicide, is something which I think the medical profession is steering clear of right now.
You could talk more with him about that later, okay? Because I don't think he answered your question well enough, right? Okay. John, it's quite clear, hearing what you shared with us, that what defines you ultimately between being a physician and a researcher is the physician. Would I be right to say, at the core, what gives you satisfaction, a lot more satisfaction, is being a physician? Or is it equally divided?
No, I think to be a good physician, I must always try and find out better ways to treat my patient.
Yeah, but you can find, you can keep up, but being a researcher,
okay.
You see, I'm looking at it as 2 different tracks. What do you think defines you?
Okay, so I spent 2 years doing full-time research, and I'm not good at doing full-time research.
Why do you say that?
I think I enjoy talking to patients and being with patients. I used to spend days with mice and
test tubes
and tissue cultures, and it was exciting, but I guess my whole psyche just wasn't really wrapped up around it at that time.
So it's really about the human interaction, patient interaction,
and
those
personally,
things,
yes,
right?
yes, personally, that's what I enjoy.
And so perhaps you could share with us what you would consider the most fulfilling moment in your life as a physician, and the most painful.
Well, I can't.
Maybe the most painful first.
Most painful. Well, one of the most painful experiences I've had was having to look after a colleague. I mean, many people may know, but when I came back in 1992, 93, I was asked to help start the oncology discipline, take up. My predecessor, Professor Wai Tan, was leaving, and so I was taking over from him. And my closest colleague went one day from being a colleague to becoming my patient on a Tuesday afternoon at 5 o'clock. We were joking. He was having this cough. He took an X-ray. There was a patch on his X-ray. So we were joking about what could be the cause of that patch. He went for a scope. And Professor Shanmugaratnam, who is one of my heroes. Okay, so Professor Shanmugaratnam is 91 years old and still working full-time, and still one of the best pathologists in Singapore. And Professor Shanmugaratnam used to have this love-hate relationship. Well, my colleague was, 50 years his junior, but they used to argue all the time. And Prof. Shamu was actually, his voice was choking with emotion over the phone when he called me up and said, I am looking at Tiak Lim's slides, and all I'm seeing is sheets and sheets of cancer cells. And when I went up to, it was 5 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon, when I went to break the news to him, he looked at me and he said, it's malignant, isn't it? And we just sat there because we knew what the outcome was going to be. This was 1995, 96. So we sat there just waiting for his wife to come, and his wife is a doctor also. And he asked me to promise him that I would be with him all the way to the end. So that was probably...
And how long was it?
How long he was extremely brave. I mean, he was on treatment, and the treatment controlled his cancer until he knew that it wasn't going to last forever. So he asked me to stop treatment. We kept them going for about a year. He asked me to stop treatment the last week of May because he wanted to pass away in June during school holidays so that his children could have that time to at least, not be in school. So we stopped his chemotherapy. He loved Japanese food. I took him to the best Japanese restaurant in town at that time. We spent a fortune on some of the best sashimi. And 5 days later, he was gone.
Thanks for sharing this. Fulfilling? Rewarding?
His daughter just graduated this year. This year. His daughter just graduated this year from medical school.
Ah.
And she's now continuing his legacy.
As a doctor, fulfilling moment. As a physician.
People like Joyce. Joyce's picture sits on my table when she graduated from university. I told my wife about that. I said, don't be mad. So I went to Joyce's wedding. My wife went too. I mean, Joyce is a very special person.
Thanks a lot for sharing this, John. And it's been 1.5 years since we've been doing your live every month. And this has been quite a session. And thank you. And I think without individuals such as you who are quietly committed to the cause, I think we wouldn't be where we are today. It's not about saving lives, is it? It's about continuing with hope.
Yes.
And hope has a premium by itself. And really, at the end of the day, I can only imagine how challenging it must be, even though you are quite understated about it, But you've made us realize that being a physician is indeed a special vocation. It's a calling. And we're very proud of what you've achieved, and we wish you all the best on behalf of NUS and the family. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. We've got something for you. This is a picture with me, so they'll remember. It's taken just now of us, right? It's a small token of our appreciation and to remind you that you need to continue with your good work, right? This is for you.
Thank you very much.
Professor John Wong. Thank you.
Thank you,
I thought
Mrs.
no flash photography was allowed. And John, this is something for you to say how much this evening was rewarding. You can, my name is spelled V-I-S-W-A. You could sit.
I meant to sign something here.
Yeah, and I know you're a doctor, but could you try and write legibly? Looking at his writing, it's quite clear that he has not been practicing for some time. You want to read it out for us?
Viswas and friends, we go to seek a great perhaps.
Wow, wow.
Francois Rabelais.
A poet. Thank you. Thank you very much, John. Thank
My
you.
pleasure.
Well, I'd like to invite all of you, John, of course, for light refreshments. Thank you very much for joining us this.
Thank you.
Please, we'll hand it over to you later. Good morning.